Hi, I'm Duncan Loader, and today I'm giving my presentation on my dissertation, Regulatory Protective Measures in Ice Hockey and Risky Behaviours by Alberto Zhang and Pascal Restraza. I'll start by talking about what the Peltzman effect is and how this was first discussed. I'll then move on to discuss how this experiment was conducted and how the data was analysed, before linking this to the 2008 financial crisis and how a psychological phenomenon could explain how business actors engaged in gradually riskier behaviours over time, eventually leading to the 2008 financial crash. The Peltzman effect was first discussed in 1975 in his paper by Sam Peltzman, in which he theorised that mandatory seatbelts in cars would cause drivers to engage in riskier and riskier driving because they felt more protected behind the wheel. Now, this couldn't really be conducted properly because there are so many external factors when discussing car accidents. Traffic increasing can reduce the amount of accidents, cars becoming safer can reduce the amount of injuries, road conditions changing, drunk driving becoming far less prevalent means that analysing the number of accidents or the number of injuries doesn't really work. Now, in 2001 to 2006, the National Ice Hockey League in Canada and the US didn't require mandatory visors in the helmets of the players, whereas European leagues did. In 2006, the NHL locked out because of a player pay dispute. This meant that there were two groups of players, both now forced to wear helmets with visors, one group who had before and one group who never did before. This means you have a control group and a group who can be analysed against this when seeing how many penalty minutes they were giving away and how risky their skating was when forced to wear a visor as opposed to when they skated without. Now, in ice hockey, penalty minutes are only given really, 95% of the time, for risky behaviour that could injure players on the ice. Contrast this with, say, rugby or football, where many penalties are given for tactical fouls. In ice hockey, this is not the case. All penalisations, pretty much, are given due to play that could injure other players. This means penalty minutes gained by a player almost directly correlates with how risky their behaviour is on the ice, which means it's a perfect proxy for the psychological effect as opposed to just an aggregate result. Now, by taking the amount of penalty minutes gained by players that are now forced to wear a visor and contrasting it with players that were previously not, you can see how risk-taking behaviour is changing when people are forced to be subjected to additional safety measures. By running a regression against this data, you can then directly compare this and see whether players will change their behaviour and become riskier when subjected to additional protective measures, or whether their behaviour remains the same. Now, as you can see in the results, there were more goals, more assists, fewer minutes played, and more penalties in the European leagues. Now, this can almost all be explained by a difference in play style, a difference in the players themselves who were playing. But when you look at the penalty minutes conceded, the penalty minutes go up for both the players that already wore visors and the players that were now forced to wear visors. However, the players that were forced to wear visors increased the number of penalties they gave away at a much higher rate than the players that were always wearing visors. Now, from this you could possibly conclude that when forced to be subjected to additional safety measures, the players then behaved more riskily. Sorry. When you look at the graphical representation of it, you can see another interesting effect, is that previously, likely because they were already more willing to take more risk, the players that previously did not wear visors gave away more penalty minutes than players that did wear visors, even before the additional measures. Then, when they came back to the NHL, when the lockout was over, the players suddenly gave away penalty minutes at a rate much closer to the rate of the players that always wore the visors. And in 1 year, they even conceded penalty minutes at a less rate. This means that when the safety measures were taken away, the players actually felt much less safe and as a result behaved much more cautiously, even than before they were subjected to the measures. Now, the economic implications for this are that a business leader, when they feel as if they are protected from any decisions they make and any negative outcomes, will gradually take riskier and riskier decisions in the hope they pay off because they aren't worried about any negative impact. Now, when Adam Smith first discussed ownership and control in The Wealth of Nations, he never envisaged that now business leaders, CEOs and board members would often be so far away from holding any stake in the company that they were controlling because they're viewed as such experts and don't actually hold stock at any level which is significant to them compared to the amount of money they're making in salary. This means that the people that have stake in the company are now third parties to the decisions they're made, similar to the other drivers on the road that previously always wore seatbelts, or the players that always wore visors before. Suddenly, over time, as the other people, the CEOs, who now feel more protected, they'll engage in risky behaviour that affects stakeholders in businesses and customers, but does not affect the people making the decisions. In the lead up to the 2008 financial crisis, securitization and mortgage-backed collateralized debt obligations were becoming more and more prevalent. These meant that these financial options were becoming more and more complex and further away from the mortgages they represented. Now, the estate agents and the people's buying the houses, they are the actual stakeholders in these transactions. However, the people making the decisions that caused this crisis are now so far away from that they weren't even negatively impacted. Now, these people are the third parties represented. And this is the crux of the issue, is that increasing these safety measures for some people when other people are already behaving in this manner causes a massive amount of excess risk in markets for people that were already behaving sensibly. In conclusion, the experiment does show a lot of evidence for the Peltzman effect that previously was not shown because the proxies for behaviour are much closer than previously was ever possible, as the experiment acted as almost a perfect fishbowl where previously only aggregate data over huge different locations and time periods was available. The reason that the economic implications occurred is because removing regulations in business almost acts as the same as increasing protective measures in a sport, because regulations are there to control the behaviours of business leaders, and without them, the business leaders are actually more isolated from the decisions they make. So, counterintuitively, the removal of regulations is almost like the adding of protection as opposed to the removal. Now, this means that risk-taking will just go up and up and up, and by adding accountability for the people making the decisions, you actually reduce the amount of protection they feel they have, and they will be forced to behave in a manner that will not negatively impact on third parties who are the main stakeholders in markets, as opposed to those just making the decisions that affect them. I hope you found this interesting, and thank you for looking it over. I don't think I need to say that.